What's the wildest reason you've ever heard for someone calling off their wedding? Story 1. My grandma's twin sister kept the wedding date, but switched grooms. Her sweetheart was thought to be lost at war, and he miraculously showed up over a year later, 2 weeks before she was due to marry another guy. My grandma, who was maid of honor, had to stand on the steps of the church and turn away guests of the first groom who hadn't gotten the word. Many of them didn't know that the bride had a twin, so they thought my grandma was her sister, standing there in a formal dress with a bouquet, claiming that the wedding was cancelled. They're 97 now and she still gets mad at her sister when the topic comes up. Story 2. I had a regular at one of the bars I worked that claimed she called off her wedding a week before because, and this is a quote, he ripped an extremely smelly fart while we were in bed. Ruined the whole thing for me. Now she was also a middle-aged alcoholic who wasn't living her best life, so I take it with a grain of salt, but then again, if there ever was a type to call off a whole wedding last minute over something that minor and stupid, it'd be that type, I guess. Sub-story. OMG, this unlocked a memory. I broke up with a man for doing this, except he aimed his butt at me under the covers and then threw the covers over my head and held me in there. Wasn't fucking funny, it smelled like a chemical mixture that was melting someone's flesh. He thought it was hilarious. It was at that moment I realized his hygiene and diet were way too incompatible with me. Let alone his behavior. I'm all for funny fart jokes like most people are, but there's a time and a place and a way to execute it. Story 3. Going back around 10 years ago, I called my, now former, mate to ask him what he and the missus wanted for a wedding present as they didn't have a registry. Turns out I called in the middle of my mate calling off the wedding. He showed up to my place soon after to get some sympathy over it, but I ended up kicking him out and cutting him off entirely as soon as I found out why he called it off. Turns out, and he gave her a list of rules to follow once they got married. Some of the rules included: must drop out of uni, not allowed to work, no friends unless he approved of them first, no contact with any males, no having her family over, must have full responsibility over all cooking, cleaning, shopping and laundry, no social media on her phone, only allowed on her computer so he could monitor it, must fully immerse in the 1950s housewife lifestyle and mindset. Must be okay with him engaging in extramarital activities. She dodged a major bullet. Last I heard from him, he got fired for hotboxing in the company car on his work break, and lost his license the same day for the same reason. She's thriving. Edit, just remembered another rule. No having a separate bank account. Story 4. A friend of a friend was engaged, but they decided to end it when a fortune teller told her the couple had been siblings in a previous life. The weird part is it seems likely they don't believe that, but felt it sounded more reasonable than their real reasons. Story 5. The bride ran away with the groom's father. My cousin was in the bridal party. She hosted the bridal shower and spent a fortune on it, and the very expensive bridesmaid dress the bride demanded, only for the bride to elope with her future father-in-law the night before. My cousin was spitting feathers. Story 6. Maybe more smart than crazy. But a friend called off her wedding a month before it was supposed to happen. They had dated for around 7 years or so. Everything was arranged and paid for, etc. She found out that her fiancé was stealing money from her bank account and using it to gamble. She called her bank to investigate missing funds, and they had pictures of him at the ATM. She sold her dress on eBay and gave the engagement ring back to his best friend because it turns out the best friend was the one who had paid for it. About 3 years later, she ends up marrying the best friend. I think she made a wise decision. Story 7. Someone very close to me had to cancel the wedding when her fiancé told her that he wanted to have kids with someone of his own race, and that he did not think that she would not be a good parent to biracial children. I mean, that's his choice, but it's kind of weird that he suddenly realized that she is white 6 years into the relationship. Story 8. Not wild, just sad. Couple planned a wedding and I was going to play for the ceremony, then a couple of months later I got a call from the vicar saying she's been diagnosed with cancer and they want to put it forward until only a few weeks' time. She didn't even make it that long. The wedding day was when they held her funeral. Story 9. It was called off the day before due to homosexuality. This was in 1999. They were both gay and were getting married for appearances. In retrospect, it's amazing how much things have changed in just 25 years. At the time, being gay was a serious persistent risk to one's personal safety, professional opportunities, and often personal relationships. At the last minute, she decided that she couldn't go through with it. Happy ending though, they're both currently living their best lives and America is doing a much improved, if still imperfect, job of not obstructing that. He just celebrated the 4th anniversary of his marriage to a wonderful man. Story 10. I was going to be a guest at a wedding and found out it was cancelled 2 weeks before the date. The bride found out that the groom had gotten a significant discount on the price of the venue and she was insanely angry that anything at her wedding cost less than premium. Keep in mind, this was her dream venue that she had chosen. She was just mad that her fiancé was cheap. Or something. I was never super close to either of them, but the last I heard they never ended up getting married. Also guys, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe because it would make our day and you can change your mind anytime. Thank you and have a nice rest of your day. Story 11. A Mormon I knew canceled his wedding the night before. Both of their families had flown in and spent loads of money for this destination wedding. She had gotten on birth control shortly before their wedding and they got in a big argument with him claiming that she was a completely different person on birth control and he didn't want to marry her. They called the wedding off. He told me later that they actually were still good friends and got along great after all the stress of wedding planning. He often thought about pursuing a relationship again, but their families had grown so resentful after the failed wedding that it just wasn't worth it. Story 12. Canceled the wedding because he was Catholic and she was Protestant and they decided to have 2 ceremonies, one at her church and one at his, but could not agree on which one would be first. Probably for the best if they couldn't even compromise on the wedding. I hate to think the challenges they would have faced once kids were brought into the mix. Story 13. Well, not a weird reason per se, but my cousin was going to have her wedding during pandemic restrictions. Of course, as we were reaching the peak of an infection wave, the government decided to impose heavier restrictions the very morning of the wedding. So a bunch of the people whom my cousin didn't consider important enough to inform about the postponed wedding found ourselves waiting in front of a closed restaurant, and then the police also started interrogating us why we were gathering in a crowd. Story 14. It's been a while since I heard this, so I hope I get the details right. Groom found out the bride-to-be was cheating on him. I think it was with the best man. He went through with the wedding anyway, and when it was time to do his speech he asked everyone to look for something under seats. It was a picture of the bride and best man together coming out of a hotel. He then proceeded to tell her he knew she was cheating and was divorcing her, LOL. Story 15. Now, I've only heard stories about this, so I can't corroborate exactly how true it is, but I've heard it from enough people who know the people involved far better than I do to believe there's truth to it. Guy was in the military, qualified for Army's world-class athlete program, was on track to go into the Olympics. Was engaged to a girl, got her pregnant, then he saved someone's life and got shot in the leg in the process. Killed his hopes of going to the Olympics, and she left him during the planning stages of the wedding. Not the end of the story. He goes on to work elsewhere, co-parents with his kid, starts dating a woman that he works with. They end up leaving that company together, and depending on who you ask, either some racist shenanigans occurred or the company was about to fire them anyway and they left while crying about racist shenanigans. Regardless, she gets pregnant a few months after leaving, and they plan on doing a whole announcement of being engaged publicly at their baby shower. Who shows up? His first baby mama. Not because their child is there, turns out she's the second woman's cousin. She was playing stepmother to a girl that's actually her first cousin once removed, and his kids will be both siblings and cousins. That news made it so they held off on announcing their engagement. Well, social pressure and scrutiny kind of fucked up their relationship and it became this on and off deal for a couple of years. She got pregnant again and they insisted they were done listening to other people and were going to get married. They go through planning the wedding and set to do it on Valentine's Day to make a big show of it. Less than a week before the wedding, he doesn't have a job anymore. She bailed and left him with the kids. They eventually got to a place where they can tolerate talking to one another, but for a long while they literally could not say a word to the other without it turning into a fight. Story 16. Turned out the bride was actually super racist and didn't want the groom's black adoptive parents, the people he thinks of as mom and dad, to be in any photos. She assumed he'd just be cool with this, saying stuff like, "It's not your fault who you got adopted by, we can have your real parents in the photos." She also caused an endless amount of stress for the maid of honor, who was black, by getting light gray bridesmaid dresses that matched her wedding dress and then being upset that it looked white on her, and not allowing her to dye it a darker gray because then she'll stand out even more. It's so crazy how long people can hide such their racism while also just assuming that everybody else agrees with it and being shocked when it's seen as a bad thing. Story 17. A friend of a friend called off her wedding because her stomach was upset. This happened the morning of, after a ton of guests from out of town traveled to our city to come to the wedding. When asked by a groomsman if maybe she could talk some Imodium and see how she is before calling it off, the groom acted super offended at the suggestion. This guy absolutely babies this woman. No one in the friend group liked her that much in the first place, and this really put the nail in the coffin. Story 18. I worked in catering and the craziest story we ever had was this. The bride and groom were getting married on a weekday, which was unusual enough. Most of our weddings were Friday through Sunday, and they were fairly young but seemed normal and enthusiastic during the planning. On the day of the wedding, we let their vendors set up early since no other events were taking place. We didn't know anything was going wrong until the wedding photographer took away one of the place settings off the sweetheart table and took pictures of just one by itself. Then he started telling the staff that the groom had canceled. The ceremony in the garden didn't happen obviously, but the bride and her side still showed up for the reception. It was a much smaller head count than expected. Parking lot security told us that the groom showed up at the end of the night and almost got pummeled by her family, and then they made out in her car. They showed up weeks later totally together and wanted to see if anyone knew who sent their florist away. The florist was told by someone, our staff or that big mouth photographer, that the wedding was cancelled, so they just drove off without delivering the flowers. The couple was suing them for not providing the flowers. I think they had to go to a courthouse to actually get married, but they acted like this was all very normal behavior. Story 19. My buddy Greg came home from work to find his fiancée having sex with her cousin on the living room couch while the kids were home. He just bailed on her and the kids. Nobody saw him for like a year. Maybe longer. This was a while ago, so I'm not positive on the time frame. Then he shows up at the party house where me and my friends lived, pretty wasted one day. After a few drinks, it comes out he had smashed in the back window of his ex-fiancée's car, dumped a bunch of gas in it and set it on fire. He had paid for the car so she could work, but he wasn't on the title. So that was his way of getting the money back. They tried to hang that on him, but there was zero proof of it. I'm only telling you this story because he passed away from an overdose years ago. So he is no longer culpable. Story 20. On the same theme as the original question, both my parents called off their engagements when they met each other. Both my mom and dad were engaged to other people and they happened to work at the same place. One day my mom walked into the canteen, saw my dad and basically said, "That's who I'm going to marry." Within weeks they agreed to end their respective relationships. This was back in the 70s, so on the same night, each took their current partners out to a pub and broke the news. My dad's now ex-fiancée took it hard but was okay in the end. My mom's ex didn't take the news too well. When it came time to drop her home, he just kept driving up the road, missing each motorway exit as they came. It took some convincing from her to get him to turn around and drop her home. My folks married within 6 months in July '79 and are still ticking along nicely. Oh, and as fate would have it, my mom's ex went on to marry someone else and I'm now good pals with his kid. We met in our late 20s. I've met his dad, my mom's ex, my mom has met him. Story 21. The groom canceled his wedding on the spot because he discovered his wife was sleeping with his best friend the night before the wedding. He showed a video of his wife cheating on him right at the wedding and proudly leaving. Story 22. I went to school with someone whose wedding was called off 2 months before due to the fact that she had been arrested for sexually abusing one of her elementary school students. The abuse allegedly began the same month as the engagement. Story 23. My girlfriend's friend had to cancel theirs because the night before the wedding she walked in on her husband to be curled up on a couch with his mother sucking on her bare titty like he was a baby breastfeeding. It was a destination wedding too, so lots of friends and family had traveled to be there. Story 24. A family member of mine called off their engagement, keeping gender ambiguous here just in case, because their fiancé ended up being an addict, not just drugs, but soliciting paid sex and was certainly also a sex addict. None of us knew until it all blew up. Fiancé couldn't hide secrets anymore once they moved in together. My family member is now happily married. Fiancé also got caught using Reddit. Story 25. I heard of someone who called off his wedding because of a fortune cookie. No joke. Before the wedding, he went out for Chinese food. After dinner, he cracked open a fortune cookie that read, "A hasty marriage brings regret." He started overanalyzing everything about his relationship and freaking out about getting married too quickly. By the end of the week, he was convinced the cookie was a sign and called off the wedding. Story 26. I have heard of certain people crashing weddings just so they can cause a scene. The priest will say, "Does anyone have any objections? Speak now or forever hold your peace." And these random people will stand up and say something like, "I never stopped loving you," or "We have been having an affair for months," or any other thing that causes the whole wedding to erupt. Then the wedding gets called off because some random stranger wanted to watch the world burn. Story 27. One of Dad's friends bought a flatbed trailer from him. His fiancée apparently came unglued at the prospect of him spending so much money, a few thousand at best, and he's a hobby farmer so it would get put to use, so that put the kibosh on the engagement. Story 28. My wife's friend broke up with her husband after falling for a Belarusian hockey player that plays in the FPHL. They got engaged on what was supposed to be her honeymoon and got married 3 weeks later. The wedding was beautiful for one that was thrown together in less than 3 weeks. Story 29. The girl's family did not want any ceremony. Her mom had issues with my mom. She worried that my mom would embarrass her. My dad asked if they would come visit for a reception party which he will throw at his expense. You only need to show up. They agreed for the same. To add to it, my dad proposed that you might as well do the ceremony if you wish to. The girl called off the wedding because she wanted to get the ceremony at her place. Thank you all for watching and don't forget to leave a like, comment and subscribe.